Right, thanks for coming. So, just to explain the reason why this is linked to the trip that some of us are going on in July, the Protestant Reformation takes off, begins in Saxony and Thuringia, the parts of Germany, the exact place where we're going to, and in Weimar itself, there are places that we'll visit where Martin Luther preached sermons, and where we will see works of art by Cranach, who ended his days in Weimar and who died in Weimar. So that's the reason for this talk, and start to get us into the history and culture of this part of the world that we're going to visit. And then the next few weeks there'll be masterclasses kind of gradually, chronologically moving towards the present. And we'll finish up by looking at the communist period of East Germany, and that'll be just a week before we go on the trip. Right, so let's get into this then, the Reformation. So the Reformation, really we think of it as starting in the 16th century, the 1500s, but the roots of it go back, and there were reformations or attempted reformations before the Reformation that I think we need to know about, because they influenced what came. So to begin with, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the last actual Roman emperor, 600 years after that, I think we could say that the Roman Church, the church in Rome, had kind of, it was the heir to the Roman Empire, even to the point that the Bishop of Rome was known as the Pontifex Maximus, which is a title that Roman emperors had before, the High Priest of Rome. So really they were seen as the heirs to Julius Caesar and Augustus. But there have been squabbles with other rulers, kings and princes who had emerged in those kingdoms after the Roman Empire collapsed, for power with the popes. Who should rule the territory? Who should have the actual political power? And many popes wanted not just spiritual leadership, but power to govern territory, like a king, like an emperor. And we could say that in the 11th century, this really sort of builds up as the Roman Church in Western Europe is absolutely ascendant. And some people say it sort of culminates in Pope Boniface VIII in this period. And I realised when I was looking at these pictures that I've actually met him. Apparently, Jim Carter, I met him and his wife Mr Aronsohn at parents years ago. So, anyway, and also it's worth mentioning that Pope Boniface VIII gets mentioned in Dante's Inferno. He's in hell. Dante didn't like him very much, and he's been punished like a lot of other popes who've abused their position in the church. Being punished by being buried upside down and having their feet tickled with flames. So that's a warning to everyone. Okay, now also, they had rivalry with kings of France. That was quite important. And at one point, the papal seat moved from Rome to Avignon in southern France. But then increasingly, the rivalry opened up with the Holy Roman Emperors. And the heirs of Charlemagne, who called themselves holy and called themselves Roman. Somebody, possibly Voltaire, said the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. So the culmination of these papal attempts to increase their political power, even at the head of an army, some popes actually led an army into battle. It's hard to imagine these days. This rivalry got very bad, particularly in northern Italy, where political factions took the side either of the Pope or the Emperor. This is also the context of Dante and Dante's life in Florence. And the Guelphs were pro-Pope, and the Ghibellines were pro-Emperor. But it's all very complicated. You don't need to worry about it too much. Just to know that there already was this kind of rivalry, and in fact the imperial party, as they were known, those that supported the power of the Holy Roman Emperor, began to refer to the Pope as the Antichrist. So this starts happening even before the idea of the Antichrist. Another group to refer to the Pope as the Antichrist were the spiritual wing of the Franciscan order, who believed in the poverty of Christ. And the church at this point had become very, very wealthy, so they weren't too keen on the idea that the leaders of the church should live like Christ and should live in poverty, because they certainly didn't live in poverty at all. So they also referred to the Pope as Antichrist. Oh, and if you want to see some of these debates between the Franciscans and the papal delegations, it features sort of in the background of The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, great novel, a couple of films. Well, that's a TV series, that's a film worth watching, definitely. Yeah, and here we go, this idea of the Pope as Antichrist, as the actual devil. So this sort of comes into play. Right, now let's switch over to England. So in England, at Oxford University, John Wycliffe emerged as a reformer to challenge papal authority. And this is in the 1370s, and his message sounds quite similar to some of the things that Martin Luther said 150 years later, that we should return to the Bible, that the Bible is the source of truth more than the power structures of the church, and that it's the only source of divine truth. He translated it into English, and the church authorities didn't immediately condemn this. In fact, he was only condemned as a heretic after his death. And the English Bible was only banned, all translations of the Bible in English were banned in 1407. And then they dug up his body and burnt it. He was already dead, so it didn't make much difference. But anyway, they wanted to warn people against heresy. The printing press, the invention of the printing press, the fixed type printing press, would spread translations of the Bible, and this would be a big factor in why Luther was more successful in his Reformation than the earlier John Wycliffe had been. It's also thought, a group formed around Wycliffe's ideas called the Lollards, but they never really made much headway, and it suggested that had they gained the support of even just one king or prince, things might be different. We might have made some more changes before Luther came along. Then in a few years later, so when we talk about Jan Hus in what we now call Czech Republic or Czechia, and he also was a university professor at the newly founded University of Prague. And Prague was an important city because it was the seat of the Holy Roman Emperor at that time. Mostly German-speaking city at that time as well. And but Jan Hus was he's more associated with Czech nationalism. Anyway, he was very influenced by Wycliffe and the message of church reform, and his rebellion became an assertion of Czech identity as well against German-speaking authorities. But he was promised a safe passage from a hearing by the Holy Roman Emperor, but then the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles IV, went back on his promise, and he was arrested and burnt at the stake. So he also had followers called Hussites. There was fighting, but ultimately didn't come to anything at the time. But he's now revered in, like a lot of people who are burnt at the stake, you end up being turned into a statue in the main city square. So this is the old town square in Prague, and the big Jan Hus monument right in the centre of Prague today. Another thing we should quickly consider before we get to Luther is Renaissance humanism, because the Reformation coincides with what we call the Renaissance as well. And so there's definitely this idea that something is being rediscovered, or we're going back to the source, or something like that. That which has been corrupted can be kind of rediscovered, I suppose. We talked about humanism, I think, in the history of ideas, but it's important just to remind you that it doesn't mean the same thing as what we mean by today. Today, humanism and the humanist society generally refers to people who reject religious faith. But the first humanists were not that at all. They were Christians. They were absolutely Christians. But they were interested in the sort of what we now maybe call the liberal arts and expanding university curriculums. Particularly interested in rediscovering ancient Greek and ancient Roman texts and ideas, and as opposed to only studying theology or trying to make it fit with church doctrines. Definitely is hand in hand with the Renaissance as an idea. Erasmus of Rotterdam is an important figure as well, because as we'll see, he then crosses over with Luther. He also agreed that the church was corrupt and that it needed to be reformed, but he absolutely believed that it should be reformed from within, and he opposed Luther's breakaway Reformation, and tried to find a sort of a middle ground as far as he could. Okay, so final factor we should maybe mention is it's been suggested by some people, German Renaissance, for example, in his history of Christianity, that the 14th century outbreak of the bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, in which, I can't remember exactly, but a staggering percentage of the population of Europe died as a result of this. So death and sort of the prevalence of death was very much kind of in the air, and the church kind of responded to this with the idea of purgatory. The doctrine of purgatory had been kind of bubbling up, and this idea of sort of, if you're going to go to heaven but you can't go straight away, is there anything you can do to speed up that process? And so this idea of masses or prayers being said for you to help speed your passage through purgatory, and then voluntary donations to the church for good things like patching up the roof of the church or building new hospitals in an age before any kind of state-provided healthcare. So there was a certain sense to it. It was a way of raising money for quite good things, I think. And there had been a whole kind of system of it had sort of grown up informally until Pope Clement VI in 1343 issued a papal bull, which is kind of how do you describe the papal bull?
Declaration.
A declaration of this is how it is, which tried to kind of rationalise the system of indulgences that was already quite established. It was seen as a thanks offering to God and to the church, but it turns out to be one of the things that Luther really objected to. This idea that you could have any impact on your salvation by paying for it, for example. He just thought was absolutely false, and there's no grounds for it in the Bible, etc., etc. Viewed in a certain way, German Renaissance says there were perhaps some good reasons to cherish indulgences, let's say. They were useful for fundraising for good causes, such as rebuilding churches or charitable homes and hospitals. Indulgences were as ubiquitous then as the national lottery is now, in terms of the way of funding some good causes, perhaps, by trying to win some money. By the time we get to Luther and his Reformation, there was a big drive to make a lot of money, particularly in German-speaking lands, for example, the rebuilding of St. Peter's in Rome, and there was other politics involved with who was raising that money. It was like sort of tax farming. People were kind of given a contract to go collect the money, and there was a lot in it for them as well. And then there was all sorts of political jiggly-pokery alongside. So Martin Luther and his 95 theses. What do you think we should tell me to start with about Martin Luther?
So this is a monk, a German monk from the middle of nowhere in a place called Saxony, not politically significant place. A young man who was deeply spiritual, wrapped with guilt about his own sin. He joined the monastery because of an interpretation of an event, an act of God in his eyes, where there was a horrendous storm, and he said he prayed to the Mother of Mary, if if you save me from this, I'm going to go and become a monk. And he survived the storm, and then he entered the monastery a few days later. And yeah, devout Catholic, a bit like the guy that started the English Reformation, Henry VIII, who was declared defender of the faith by the Pope just a few years before he split and formed his own church. But yeah, he joined the Augustinians, who were people that emphasized the sinfulness of humanity maybe slightly more than other Christian groups. And yeah,
you mentioned founding a new university in Wittenberg by one of the, I get a bit mixed up, there are so many Friedrichs, for example, Friedrich the wise, Friedrich the steadfast, Friedrich the this, the that, and the other, the pious. Anyway, one of the electors of Saxony opened a new university in Wittenberg, which is really quite a small place. And Luther, as well as being a monk, was also an academic, wasn't he? He taught at the university, which is quite new. By the way, it's the university that Hamlet went to, which is worth knowing, I suppose. And anyway, so it was in Wittenberg where he supposedly nailed a document to the doors of the castle church with 95 theses against indulgence. So that was the particular thing that really kind of got him going.
Is it worth mentioning that Western Europe at this time was under the authority of the Catholic Church in its entirety. So Eastern Europe at this time is under the authority of the Orthodox Church. Maybe some of you guys have some family in Greece or Russia or whatever. Similar but related kind of Christianity. And so the authority of the Church is completely and utterly ubiquitous all over Western Europe at this time.
Although we should mention, just to add to that picture, that Constantinople had just fallen to the Ottoman Turks. And they, in fact, they carried on. The Ottoman Turks, the Muslims of course, were continuing to expand into the Balkans and southeastern Europe. And around the time of the Reformation, the Muslim armies even reached the gates of Vienna. So, to some extent, Christendom fell under attack. And so that played into the dynamic of, perhaps trying to maintain a kind of unity, I suppose. And at the very same time, of course, Christianity was expanding westwards in its conquest of Mexico and South America, taking Catholicism with it as well. And as we'll see, at this time when perhaps the popes lost control over parts of Northern Europe, they gained other places and other members. Now, this will be one of those moments where we sort of compare. We've already compared indulgences to lottery tickets. Somebody has referred to the 95 Theses being sort of spread around as going viral in the early modern sense of going viral, which is to do with this, right? Because this is, if you like, the equivalent of the internet 500-600 years ago. Suddenly, if you've got a printing press, you can put it out there. You can put your message out there, and be it in posters or in pamphlets and leaflets and that kind of thing. Books are still very expensive, but certainly the Gutenberg press, as you can see about kind of, well, did we say what was the 1517 was when Luther nails. I mean, this nailing of it to the church doors has been perhaps a little bit mythologized, as these things tend to be. So yeah, only 70 years after, in Europe anyway, the invention of the movable type printing press and all the opportunities that gave for sort of spreading ideas much more quickly. And even if lots of people couldn't read, as long as you've got one person who can read, it can be read out to all those other people. But one thing that everybody can understand, as we'll get into in the second half of this, is images and pictures. And that's why Luther recognised how important art and imagery was to spreading the ideas of the Reformation in an age when only a small number of people were literate. And so a lot of pamphlets were published and put out by Luther, including, I think this one is the Babylonian Captivity of the Church, And this idea that somehow, since, perhaps even as we were discussing this morning, since sort of the church was recognised by Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, and gradually kind of incorporated into the power structures of the Roman Empire, it was felt that this was bad for the church, and that the church, the true church, had been kind of in a kind of captivity, a kind of exile from its true self by being in league with Roman emperors and the powers of this world. And that was certainly a message that Luther was promoting. Right, so in these first few years, things in Europe are a little bit up in arms because there's going to be an election for a new Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperors had to be elected by 7 German rulers who were known as electors. So Germany at this point, as you are probably aware, was not unified. It was hundreds of small city-states, principalities, some slightly larger than others. Some had a minor prince or a bishop in charge. Others had an elector, like the Elector of Saxony. And that's a big deal because 7 electors elect the next Holy Roman Emperor. It's not particularly democratic. There's all sorts of deals and horse trading behind the scenes, and certain families dominate, as the papacy was dominated by certain families as well. The Holy Roman Empire was dominated by the Habsburg family, and at this point, the teenage Charles, becomes Charles V, is hoping to be elected. The previous Holy Roman Emperors died, and he needs the votes of as many of these electors as possible. One of them is Frederick III, that's Frederick of Saxony, and he needs his vote. And although nobody really seems to quite know why, Frederick III of Saxony kind of decided that he would defend Martin Luther and at least protect him.
Well, Frederick the Wise was, in charge of the university. Martin Luther was the professor of biblical studies, and therefore, when he got some notoriety, maybe he thought, I'm going to protect my superstar biblical scholar lecturer. Maybe that's it. To all intents and purposes, he was a devout Catholic, Frederick the Wise, but maybe, I don't know, maybe he wanted to protect him because he wanted to keep him at the university. Not really sure.
That's one possible reason. Devin McCulloch and others, for example, in that the Rest is History podcast, they're really not quite sure. On In Our Time as well, nobody really explains. There's a slight enigma to this, but anyway. The Pope now is Pope Leo X. He hears there's a bit of trouble going on, a bit of theological rebellion going on in some obscure part of Germany. But he doesn't really take too much notice of it to start with. He's kind of maybe a little bit complacent. He doesn't go stamping out straight away. And so Luther spreads his ideas for a few years before really the Pope issues a papal bull in 1520 demanding that Luther recant his ideas or risk execution for heresy. And at this point Luther refuses, says, no, I'm not going to recant, why should I? So the Pope sends another bull excommunicating Luther, which then Luther then by this point is really getting quite a big following, and he publicly burns the papal bull in Wittenberg, cheered on by townsfolk and students who are getting whipped up into this rebellion, getting very excited by it. And Luther really does start to see himself taking on this heroic role. It's my destiny to reform the church and to bring the truth to all humanity. And he believes that the church has fallen into a satanic error. He's obsessed by the devil. And he really believes that he's doing the Lord's work. He is wielding the sword of truth and justice, metaphorically. He proclaims the Pope the enemy of all Christendom, the Antichrist. And the whole church apparatus. He's not just saying, look, let's just clean up these indulgences and then we're all good. He's saying, no, the whole thing has to go. It's rotten to the core. The whole thing is just satanic. And that's, so this brings into the question of kind of like degrees of radicalism. And at this point, anyway, Luther is Mr. Radical. Now, later in his life, once, as things move on into the 1520s, he draws back from some of the radicalism, and others go down the purity spiral and kind of forge ahead in ways that Luther doesn't approve of anymore, as we'll see. Anyway, so Charles V is elected Holy Roman Emperor, I think in 15... Oh my God! Can't remember exactly when. But anyway, he's only a teenager. Charles V is still only a teenager and he's still finding his feet. He's quite devout, he's a devout Catholic, but he agrees to at least give Luther a hearing. He's kind of persuaded by Frederick III to give Luther a hearing. And so, just to show you the Habsburgs, this is confusing, right? The Habsburgs had all these possessions that you can see in green. I mean, Charles V was born and brought up in what we call Belgium, or near Holland, but anyway, he's a French speaker, and at that point that's owned by the Habsburgs, as is Spain, as are Sicily, Sardinia, southern Italy, Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, bits of northern Italy. He's just got all these territories that he owns all over the place. And so when he's elected Holy Roman Emperor, which you can see the borders here in red, he's the outright monarch of these green bits, and of course now grabbing some bits of what we know in Mexico and so on. And he's now got this kind of leadership of the combined German states that we call the Holy Roman Empire as well. His German capital was Augsburg. That's it, Augsburg. And here he is. This is slightly older Charles V with the poet. Right. So now a meeting of the leaders, rulers, electors, and emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was called a diet. And Worms is a city on the banks of the Rhine, and the Diet of Worms, great title for a get-together, was where they, in 1521, where they decided that Luther would be heard, and sort of to some degree put on trial. He had debates. He had a very important debate in Leipzig, where the papal representative almost sort of got the better of him a bit, because he almost got him to admit that he thought Jan Hus was right in most respects. So they said, well, Jan Hus was a heretic, so if you think that he was right in some respects, then you're a heretic too. So he's kind of a bit wrong-footed in the debate in Leipzig. But he prepared more thoroughly for the diet in Worms. And he went there on foot, and it was a bit of a, by this point he's a celebrity in the German-speaking lands, and he's really sort of getting cheered through every town and village. And I think he did make that really very explicit comparison of himself with Jesus coming to Jerusalem, because he knew there was a very good chance that he would be condemned as a heretic and executed in the same way. And he's comparing himself to Jesus. Says when Jesus went to Jerusalem, he overturned the money lenders' tables or the money changers' tables in the temple, and he said, that's what I'm doing by criticising the church and its indulgences and so on. So he's urged to recant, and he said, these are your books. Are they by you? And he says, yes, they're by me. Do you stand by what you wrote in them? He says, well, yes, but give me a day to think about this. So he kind of quite dramatically holds up the whole process and buys a bit of time, and then he comes back the next day and he delivers a big grandstanding speech, where he's decided that no, he won't back down. So he refused to recant, and he supposedly delivered the famous line, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Now he probably didn't say those exact words, not least because he was speaking in German at this point. But after the event, this is kind of what was written down in his kind of summing up of his speech. Unless I'm convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures and by clear reason, and bound by the Scriptures, I quote, my conscience is captive to the Word of God. I cannot and will not recount anything. For to go against conscience is neither safe, right nor safe. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen. There is in German. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. So yeah, these, and I think, I mean, what do you think, Mike, about this kind of, what this really represents about kind of the primacy of the individual's conscience and how you have to stand up for what you believe in, and no way should you ever back down or recant or go against your own conscience.
So you can't underestimate how radical what Luther represents here is, because when he says, here I stand, I can do no other, to go against conscience is neither right nor safe, what he's essentially saying is, my moral and theological position trumps everything, really. There's absolutely nothing that you, the community that you represent, history can do to convince me that my interpretation of Scripture is wrong. So essentially it kind of prioritizes a personal conviction over anything else. What the Catholic Church represented and does represent today is a body of tradition. So the two sources of authority in Catholicism, as well as the Orthodox Church too, are Scripture and tradition. Scripture obviously meaning the Bible, tradition meaning the reason, the theology of important theologians. You've probably heard of Thomas Aquinas, he's an example of a very influential theologian, and church councils where a bunch of bishops and the Pope got together, hashed out, had debates about what Scripture means, who was Jesus,
Things like sacraments.
Yeah, and theology of sacraments, all that stuff.
Church and organisation.
And Luther's essentially tearing up all the pronouncements of the church councils, all the pronouncements of the popes. He doesn't accept the Pope as any authority whatsoever. In Scripture, when Jesus said to Peter, you remember Peter, the guy that denied Jesus 3 times? He said to him, you are Peter. In Greek, Petros means stone or rock. So this is a nickname Peter gives him. You're my rock. And he says, upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you authority on earth to bind or loose what you want. The Catholic Church views this as Jesus giving authority to Peter as the first pope. So there's a hierarchy, there's order, there's structure, there's a community established.
Because they believe that Peter sailed from the Holy Land to Rome, that he was the first bishop of Rome, and that he was martyred in Rome, and that every pope ever since is in an unbroken line of apostolic succession from Peter, which is historically spurious, I think.
So privilege and conscience, I think I've got a little bit of concern with in terms of the ideas. Another issue I've got with Luther, I'm not a massive fan, by the way. But I mean,
by the way,
we
should mention, I think it's always important, as I've discussed with some of you, to mention where you're coming from on these things. I was brought up as a Protestant, right? But then I sort of rejected it, and I don't consider myself a Christian anymore. Mr Aronsohn was brought up as a Catholic, just so you know. It's important to know.
It might colour my
Mr Aronsohn, so we know that too.
But another one of Luther's massive ideas is it's Scripture alone, which is what you need, and it's an individual's interpretation of Scripture, which is sufficient. Luther had a very idealistic view. I don't know, how have you guys picked up the Bible and had a leaf through? It's not the easiest text to interpret. It's not obvious what certain passages mean. Some of Jesus' parables are maybe, I know the parable of the Good Samaritan is kind of easy to understand. There's some complex parts in the Bible, many of it are. I think it needs a body and a tradition of interpretation of people who are well attuned to different ways of understanding Scripture.
What if those people who are interpreting have vested interests? Like, the church is rich now, so we don't really want to look at this bit where Jesus says about more difficult for a rich man to get to heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. So how can we trust the interpretations of things like that if the church has its own vested interests?
So Luther had a huge issue with corruption of the church in the Middle Ages, which is obvious, everyone knows about it, right? Popes with women on the side and babies and so forth. terrible, terrible, crazy stuff. When they're preaching traditional family values and they're making lots of money and having babies with different people, and mental stuff. Priests embezzling funds from their parishioners. You mentioned indulgences earlier. Most famously, there was a guy, Johannes Tetzel, who went around and he said, as soon as the penny in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. In other words, if you give me some money, grandma's going to go straight to heaven. Absurd stuff. Yes, there was abuses, but what I think was required was a Catholic Reformation, was renewal, was spiritual renewal, and the Council of Trent, just 20, 30 years after Luther, gathered the bishops together for the first time in 200 years or so, called for spiritual renewal. The Jesuits, you know the Jesuits, the current Pope is a Jesuit, and our dear Pope, everyone, is a Jesuit. But you know, they tried to combat laxity. Instead, what Martin Luther did when he broke away from the church is to say, here's the Bible, off you go. And the gates of hell are open.
The Bible is an incendiary device. Actually, that's what they say in the Hamlet's tale.
I'm being slightly polemical here, guys, but you know, hopefully
That humorous idea that he's looking for a man-centered world, that you on your own can find God. That comes from the study of humanism. Greeks and Romans.
I do think he's operating at a time, you know, we mentioned Erasmus earlier. There was a desire to return to the sources. This is just a few decades after the Renaissance period.
I'd say we're in the Renaissance.
We're in the Renaissance period. Now, the difference between Luther and Erasmus was Luther wanted to get right back to the Bible and to hell with everything else, to hell with history, interpretation, community. Erasmus wants to get back to the sources. The Bible, yes, but early Christian texts too, the early church councils.
There's also the problem, of course, as you say, that if you try and use just the Bible, you can use the Bible to justify absolutely opposing interpretations. You know, here's a quotation which seems to justify this belief. Here's another one which contradicts that. You know, so
Might do one more problem, one more issue. His attitude to philosophy is not good, and reason. He said, reason is a whore that never comes to the aid of spiritual things.
he was very crude, wasn't he, apparently? That kind of language and lots more. I mean, the invective that he poured out against his enemies, lots and lots of references to shit and bodily functions and all sorts of things. Whereas filthy.
Whereas the Catholic view, just literally on the final thing, I believe this. The Catholic view is that philosophy, you know, the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all those guys, and these were, the term is logos grammaticos, the seeds of the word are in there. There's something in these guys which is somehow from God in some way. They didn't know it because Jesus wasn't around yet, but there's something worthwhile to take from them. And Thomas Aquinas' great project is to say, Aristotle, great guy, the Bible, let's come up with a rational fusion of those two things. And the Catholic Church always viewed philosophy as something that was useful to articulate the faith. Luther said, this is a theology of glory, this is mankind's attempt to celebrate itself in its own thought, and we should do away with it, it's satanic. And I think that's not good.
Anyway, the teenage Emperor Charles V agreed with Mr O'Connell, and so he said, right, no, I don't accept this, you know, you need to recant. If you won't, then I'm going to hand you over to the Pope. But he had promised Luther safe passage from Worms, and so Luther left Worms and then was promptly kidnapped, except he wasn't really, because it was all a fake. They staged a kidnapping, but really it was Frederick III had kidnapped him and then hid him in his castle in the Wartburg. And he had to hide in this castle in disguise for the next couple of years, I think, at least a year. He grew a beard and was disguised as Junker Jorg. Junker was a German landowner, Jorg, basically. So he took on a fake identity.
although in this painting of Luther in his room in the Wartburg Castle, this is the actual real room on the right, survived. He's obviously had a shave by this point. But what he does while he's having to be kind of hidden away is he translates the Bible into German. And it's very momentous as well in terms of German language and culture, because he has to practically invent a common German. What we now call Standard German is really invented by Luther in his translation of the Bible. He brings together different dialects from different parts of Germany. There's a very good series I'm going to recommend to you, Neil McGregor podcast, you can listen on Spotify or whatever. It's called Germany Memories of a Nation, and there's an episode about Luther's creation of the German language through his translation of the Bible. And then, of course, the printing press enables that Bible to become a bestseller in terms of the day. Here it is, one of the original copies. I think they've got one of the places we're going to go in Weimar has one of the original Luther Bibles, which is illustrated by Cranach in his workshop. So we'll get to that in a second. So, just before we get on to Cranach, once sort of Luther had kind of lit the touch paper, so to speak, lit the fuse, it really did explode in certain parts of Germany. And some people said, well, you're telling us we don't need to obey authority, the Pope, so why should we obey the local landowner? Why should we obey, there is something that's sometimes referred to as the Peasants' Revolt, but you could get confused between that and the Peasants' Revolt in England. So some historians like German McCulloch prefer the Farmers' War, because apparently a lot of the people involved were not peasants as such. They owned their own land. They weren't that badly off, but they had no political representation at all. And so these rebellions broke out, and there was fighting, and a leader emerged. He was never really a central leader, but certainly somebody who had worked with Luther, who was one of Luther's companions in the early days of the Reformation, Thomas Müntzer, really wants to carry on the fight. He's very apocalyptic. The end is coming. The Antichrist is upon us. We've got the Pope is the Antichrist. Anybody that sides with the Pope is the Antichrist. They've just got to be killed. And he led an army to their doom, actually, because they weren't properly armed, and they ended up having to try and fight against the proper soldiers. So it didn't go well for them. They were slaughtered in their thousands. And he eventually was caught and horrifically executed. I think beheaded, head on a spike, all that kind of stuff. What's interesting in the kind of the afterlife of all these ideas is that in the 20th century, after the Second World War, in the Nazi period, unfortunately for Luther, he was a bit of a poster boy for the Nazis, because, as I'm sure we really must mention, towards the end of his life, he wrote a viciously anti-Semitic pamphlet. Martin Luther. And so therefore the Nazis proclaimed, that they weren't anything new, because look, Luther, we're only doing what Luther said we should do. Although I think we should also mention that the Catholic Church hasn't really got too much to be smug about when it comes to anti-Semitism either. So, but Thomas Müntzer became the big hero in East Germany after the war. And apparently the world's biggest painting was commissioned by the communist authorities in East Germany, and is like hundreds of feet long, and it represents the battle that was fought. I can't remember where exactly, but you can see here it is on East German stamps and money and statues and that kind of thing, because they believe that he was the forerunner of Bolshevism, I suppose. He marched into battle with this rainbow flag. That was his banner. I can't remember Vanessa?
Sorry.
Can you help us out with the translation? I mean, it's not a very helpful font, is it? Something about being the word of God endures forever, or something like that. Yeah? Oh, God. Oh, is it Latin? Something like that, yeah. That sounds like
Anyway, Luther condemned Munster's rebellion and said, no. He said, I know, I said you should rebel against the authority of the Pope, but other worldly authorities are to be respected because we don't want chaos. Thank you very much. So Luther kind of pulled back, and for many of his followers,
You must tell them the name of the pamphlet that he wrote.
go on, do you remember it?
Against the thieving and murderous hordes of peasants.
Against
That's
the
the name.
murderous hordes of peasants. Yeah. Exactly, you can imagine how that made Luther a bogeyman in communist East Germany, for sure. Right, and the other ways in which Luther's Reformation was interpreted very differently was in Switzerland, and Ulrich Zwingli and John Calvin, and the Swiss also broke away from Luther because they also went further than he thought they should. We call this branch of Protestantism Reformed Protestantism. And for example, they really were against images and pictures, and they set off these iconoclastic kind of riots of image destruction and image breaking. And also they banned music. They didn't want music either in church. And Luther disagreed with that. He saw the usefulness of music for in church services. He wrote hymns, some of which are still sung today, and some of which were set to music by Bach and by Mendelssohn and so on. He liked it. And so he kept music, which was probably a wise move. And also, as I said, he recognised that art and images were a useful way of spreading the new ideas, and so he certainly didn't want to kind of ban imagery. So this just shows you how the Reformation spread. Then there was a counter-Reformation, which I have time to talk about this time. Hopefully we have a trip to Italy sometime. Right, David, let's come to Lucas Cranach the Elder, who was a friend of
Can we go back?
yes, where do you want to go back?
Just here, it's fine.
Okay.
So just to point out, so with the idea of the Pope, it's a mess. In the 1400s there were three popes. There's a Pope in Florence, a Pope in Pisa, and a Pope in Rome, and they're all arguing for the Pope. And the Catholic Church is an absolute mess. The picture that you showed earlier was by Raphael, and there was a Medici Pope. There are 4 Medici Popes, there are 3 Borgia Popes. Both families are completely corrupt and decadent. I'm sure there's good people in them, but they're sleeping with their sisters and daughters, and they're having affairs, and 9-year-olds are made bishops with people, so they can tons of money, and they can do whatever they want. So it's a really corrupt, complicated society. You do have potential heroes, Savonarola. Let's take a look at him. Savonarola is the Archbishop of Florence. Florence is the centre of the Southern Renaissance. We're talking about the Northern Renaissance, but the Southern Renaissance, the 4 Ninja Turtles are all born there. There are Donatello, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo. They are the famous Southern Renaissance Ninja Turtles. And out of those, they're all great artists, and Florence is the centre of them. So you make it Florence, the ideas come from Florence, and then you go to Rome and it spreads, and you might go to Venice. And the people in the north are coming down to Venice a little bit. Back to Savonarola. Savonarola turns up in Florence. He's a legitimate Archbishop of Florence. He's a really good speaker, and he says things like, everyone's corrupt, the church is disgusting, money's disgusting, we need to get rid of money and go back to the basics, which is in a way what Luther's saying, maybe not Luther, but it's kind of that idea of going back to the basics, the central bit. But it goes a bit wrong because he starts burning things in the middle. So in America, when John Lennon said, "We're as big as God," they burned all the Beatles records. In France, he's burned all the Jewish books, and they burned everything, including Botticelli, who got caught up through his own paintings on. He also employed some young people to split on people. So he had these young kids went around and said, "You're wearing Dolce & Gabbana, go to prison." So they went around, if anyone had valuable things, they were in trouble. And they were called the snivellers, these people. And Savonarola was punished by Pope, and he was burnt. All the other things were burnt by the centre of Florence. Anyway, let's. Back to that picture. What I was quickly trying to say was, just get that last. Yeah. I was trying to say that the city-state, the idea of the Pope being important. The Pope is just in charge of a very small city-state, which is Rome, and it's not as big as Venice. It's not as powerful as Venice. Venice has got better armies. And it's completely subjugated by all of this stuff. So the Holy Roman Empire is so powerful as a secular power, and it reaches from kind of, you know, Belgium, Holland, Germany, France at one point, and Spain, all of that, you've got some teeny little city-states. The Pope doesn't have a huge power, and later on it disappears. So over here, at some point joins in. So all we've got over here, we've got a little bit of Rome, and it's got no way of coping. So people like Florence and marrying people in Spain, Medicis, to get a bit of power, they're always trading for power above. Okay, let's go back to Mr Cranach. So Mrs Cranach has awarded this special snake symbol by Elector. Let's go on with it.
Yeah, and because he was also from Wittenberg, wasn't he? So
He ended up in Wittenberg. Yeah, so I just want to say, Cranach, his name comes from Cranach, which is a little place over here. I just want to give you a teeny bit of context. I know we've got a lot of the football thing going on, and I'll talk incredibly fast, show lots of pictures, but you won't know what's going on. So it's over here, he's from over here. His father's probably a painter, and in those days you can have a workshop, you often have a family. So we can think of the Bruegel family, the Bellini family, and lots of families of artists. The whole of Venice is run by the Bellini family, who teach all the artists in Venice, really. Giorgione and Titian, the same kind of things happening here. I'll just give you a bit of context of, should we go to the next one? So there is a Northern Renaissance, and the Northern Renaissance is different from Southern Renaissance because the pictures are darker, they're more realistic, and this is a guy called Grunewald, who does the Eisenheim waterpiece, which is one of the most horrific images of Christ. And there was something called St. Anthony's Fire, where you don't eat off rye bread. You've got this terrible disease, and then you got covered in sarcoma, and then you died. And this is a huge image. It's one of the kind of famous, horrific images. And it was painted so that those people who were dying in the hospice could see this image of Christ and think, well, he's covered in boils and he's dying, and I'm dying, so it's okay. Sort of what was going on with this picture of Grunewald. This is a bedell a bit underneath. You can see he's completely covered here, like when people had AIDS, they had sarcoma all over. That's what's happening over here. And another bit of the kind of northern imagination is something like Hieronymus Bosch. We don't exactly know what was going on, but we think they were kind of biblical metaphors. And this is an amazing vision of hell, which you would say is before surrealism by a good 500 years, where you've got this kind of phallic knife. The worst thing about the knife is there's a little chip in it. So you think if it cuts you, it's really going to hurt, and it's going through the ears, and you get lots of bottoms. He's got a recorder stuck up his bottom, so there's lots of bottoms going on there, lots of strange things. So this is part of the background, and let's move on to Tilman Riemenschneider, which is a lovely name. Tilman Riemenschneider was the greatest carver at the time. Germans were very good at linewood carving. It was a very fast way of carving using linewood, and he was one of the best linewood carvers. And like Cranach, a bit like Dürer, these people became burghers. They became mayors of their town. They were really important people in their town. So in Italy, artists had a bit of a chip on the shoulder about not being as good as poets, not being as good as writers. So they worked really hard to be accepted in that way. Not so in Germany, these are often very religious people who, through a mixture of good business sense, would get into communities. But someone like Riemenschneider joined the peasants with the peasant revolt that Luther disapproved of, and actually at the end lost everything. Supposedly had his fingers broken like a mafia movie, so that he couldn't carve again, and ended up with nothing.
Whereas Cranach was very much a kind of bourgeois, he was kind of built up his business, and I think he served as Lord Mayor a few times. That kind of
Well, Riemenschneider did as well, but he was just on the wrong side. He took the wrong side in the civil wars. So then we've got Cranach, who is one of the portraits. Over here, this is Holbein, and Holbein's German, and he's in England, he's working for Henry. There's a wonderful portrait of Erasmus, with Erasmus' book here, and we can see we've got knowledge, we've got a bit of near passive world, and sort of quite rich thinker, looks quite northern because in terms of clothing, and then we've got an early version here of Luther.
Yeah, I mean, he painted, I don't know if it's hundreds, but many portraits of Luther, didn't he, throughout his life?
Many portraits, and he was a sort of all art is propaganda. Yeah, I mean, the thing about Western art is predominantly Catholic, it's all good Catholic art actually, and the development of Western art is propaganda for Christianity. And the idea is that people can't read, and if you can show it in pictures, people will understand. But the Catholic Church always has a bit of a problem because when pictures become too powerful, and there's a really good book written by Freeburger's head of Courtauld about the power of images, how art can be very powerful. The Catholic Church didn't like it. The first iconoclasm was, I don't know, 5th century, where the icons are destroyed because they're too powerful. Everyone's praying to the icon and they're ignoring the priests. So they actively go and smash all the icons they can. And this happens again later in this period.
You have a few bits of Jura.
I just want to show you Jura, because Jura is, Cranach's there.
Slightly before, or slightly younger.
And he's also better Jura, sorry, but he is the greatest, he's the sort of Leonardo of art in Germany. He's the greatest thinker. He also believed that he had melancholy, and there were 4 humours that choleric, bile, melancholy, sanguine, and he did a drawing, and he said it was just here. Little blue bit, he said my melancholy is there, and exactly where it was. And this is one of his most enigmatic and complicated prints, and it's called Melancholy. Nobody's ever worked it out. There's a sort of Sudoku over here, time, a very sad looking angel, a very miserable looking Cupid, multi-sided thing over here, and some religious imagery going on. So, and a sort of flying squirrel wrapped in melancholy there. And it's a wonderful image that's worth spending a lot of time looking at. But this is Cranach, and it's very good. The whole about Marley is obviously thinking about.
This is the revelation of the apocalypse.
That's the revelation. And this is Jura, who, in a slightly prejudiced way, does a better version. And he's looking to Jura, so his woodcuts and his engravings will be after Jura, who's this sort of master religious engraver. Let's move on a bit. And this is the last Jura, where he has these 4 figures. It's this huge thing. He's probably painted it for himself. And he talks about the humours. So we've got John, Peter and Paul, and John Sanguine, Peter's phlegmatic, Paul's melancholic, and Marco's choleric. So each of these represent the 4 humours. If you know about humours, Galen was a Greek physician taken prisoner by the Roman who came up with the theory that there were 4 liquids in the body, and this lasted for over 1,000 years. Even Leonardo couldn't quite get beyond it. So we've got he's one of the founders of Vienna. Yeah, that's one of the founders of the University of Vienna. He's looking upwards, and there's his wife, who's 28 to 18.
These kind of double portraits are very common. A lot of these portraits, there's 2 people facing each other.
Yeah, so the landscape links together, they work together. And he's a super portrait artist, and portraiture is something that's not part of the Catholic world. The idea of portraiture, secular portraits, is an intellectual, non-Catholic way of doing it. And here it's intellectuals in the Netherlands would be business people. Let's move on to another one.
So these are the Royal Commissions.
So these were Royal Commissions. This is a splendid portrait in terms of the sort of decorative ornament, torn image. These are the electors as well over here. Have a look at the hat and the style of the figure. And these look a bit like he's done the body and the face we put on. A bit Photoshop, a very good face. They don't really fit in the body. And they're also a bit Gothic. Like Gothic, you often have little sloping shoulders, and they're tall and thin. So they are a bit Gothic. He hasn't really moved fully into embrace the Renaissance in some ways. So he's the court painter of the Elector of Saxony, and he's a court citizen, as you said. He's the mayor, and he does portraits of people, including the Holy Roman Empire and the young prince, who's Charles.
So these are the 3 electors of Saxony. I think we might see this picture, and I think this is in the Cranach exhibition in Weimar. So hopefully we'll see this. So this is Frederick the Wise, who helped Luther, protected Luther in those early times. I can't remember which Frederick that is in the middle, but the Frederick on the end is this guy, Johann Friedrich the Magnanimous, who was Cranach's main patron. Here again, the 3 electors of Saxony. And so you can see here he is a little boy, Johann Friedrich, a little boy, and then as he gradually grows up, and like Henry VIII, starts to fill out rather. It's got something else in common with Henry VIII. He married one of the Cleves family. So, her name is all the same. Something of Cleves. But anyway, Anna Cleves' sister married Johann Friedrich Magnanimous. And here he is as he goes on. He fought a battle was lost the battle and was badly wounded in it, and he's got a bit of a scar which then starts to be featured in his portraits, as a kind of almost kind of badge of honour, I suppose.
And the scar is in
Bulldog's got a scar.
But also, if you went to Heidelberg in the 19th century and you fenced, you would have a schmerz, which was a scar. So you actually wanted to get a scar. I don't know how you get someone to hit you with a blade just there, not blind you, but you would have a schmerz, and that would show you really good fencing. Right. So these, I just want to say briefly about mythology, Marxism, feminism, John Berger, very fast. So the Marxist frame of art from the 1940s, 1950s leads to feminism and a feminist approach to art. That would be second generation feminism. An approach to art that art's all about showing off naked women. And mythology used in the Renaissance is an alternative. So it is a guise to look at naked people, and it tends to be more women and men. There are far many more female nudes than male nudes in pictures, which brings us to this picture here. Now this picture is a well-known picture, and it's called Venus and Cupid. Now, for me, the most interesting thing about the picture is that she's not naked. Is she naked?
She's wearing a hat.
What's she wearing? Necklace, anything else?
Hat. Oh, yeah, she's got stuff on her head.
Got stuff on there. She's got accessories. She's been to accessories, monsoon, something. She's got her accessories on. So she's not naked, and that accentuates it. It's actually, if you look at what she looks like an aristocratic woman who is one of the elector's wives. She doesn't look like a prostitute. She looks like an upper-class woman who's elector's wife. I mean, you can judge nudes in terms of the time frame. You can talk about the shape of the body, because if you see lots of nudes in art, you can roughly work out what century they're in. But if we look at the way she's clothed, what we're seeing is, this is a picture, which is a mythological picture, and because they're all Puritans, they're saying, oh no, just tell us, you know, love hurts, you might get sexual disease, and it's not a good thing to be in love, because we know because her son, who she's completely ignoring, is being stung by bees because he stuck his hand into the honey pot over here, and he's being stung all over the place. But it doesn't matter because it's a mythological picture. So if I'm showing this, and I am a very rich Lutheran religious man, I'm showing this and come to my house. I don't like looking at naked young women. What I like is I like pictures with really strong metaphors that will teach me about the Bible. That's what I'm doing. And I'm using the obvious for that. We've got trigger warning here, we've got naked images. So what we've got here is Helmut Newton, who's possibly slightly misogynist, very famous fashion photographer, and here are the models. And these are the models who are famous models, and here are the models. They've got accessories on, they've got no shoes on. So, and I think that's what Luther's doing. So we look at Luther over here, now we look at this woman who's got a hairnet, and she's got a little bit of chiffon over here, something's going on over here. The same thing with the hat. What I find slightly surprising about Luther in terms of images, Cranach and Luther, we'll come to Luther as well, is the Counter-Reformation which comes afterwards, which we talked about. The Counter-Reformation, the church says, well, we don't want all these images about naked people, and they get very strict about nudity. But under this Lutheran world, relevant is into celibacy, but Luther isn't. Luther actually gets married, he wants to have a wife, and it's maybe more kind of physical thing. And they seem quite hypocritical in a way. If we go a little bit later, we look at this very complex Italian thing by Bronzino. Obviously the church can have a problem with this, because this is Venus, and she's sticking her tongue into her son's mouth, Cupid, who's got his bottom ready for somebody to possibly interfere with. And this person's screaming in the background over here, and there are lots of arrows happening here, and she's got the tail of the serpent. So this is a really complicated allegory, possibly about courtly love that's going on. And obviously the church don't want any of that. So what happens is there's the Catholic Reformation. In response to Martin Luther's revolt against Rome, and somebody at the time says he's been to see Michelangelo's Last Judgment, and it's full of naked people. So he says, as a baptized Christian, I blush for the license which you use in expressing ideas connected to the highest aims and final ends our faith aspires. Here comes a Christian who deems it a royal spectacle to portray martyrs and virgins in improper attitudes and show men dragged down by their shame. This is his response to Michelangelo's nudity. So after Michelangelo dies, Because of the Counter-Reformation, because the church has lost tons of people who become Protestants, the church thinks, okay, we want art just to be pedagogic, it shouldn't inspire lustful feelings, it should just be didactic. So, let's get back to other one there. So what he does is, they employ this guy called Daniel Portera, and he just paints lots of bone cloths all over everybody's genitals. And he's called Mr Breeches because that's what he's doing, he's just covering, and they're still there. So he covers all these images with cloths because the church is so offended by nudity.
Okay.
A little bit.
So we need to wrap up really.
Okay.
So throughout his life, Cranach became friends with Luther. He was with God's godfather to Luther's son, because Luther got married. And that's another thing, that an innovation which the Catholic Church hasn't accepted yet. They've accepted a lot of things that Luther proposed, but not yet that priests should be able to marry. That's still not a thing in the Catholic Church. Let's not get into that. So yeah, he's married. But interesting, there's a double portrait of him with his sort of colleague Melanchthon.
And he's the one he doesn't want marriage.
He does say so, yeah. But he's, if you like, the sort of the brains behind Luther, who really kind of does a lot of the academic argumentation for the Reformation. Here's an example of some of the imagery that Cranach produced for the Reformation, which was very effective because it showed, on the one hand, Christ. Here's Christ washing someone's feet, being very humble and showing humility. Here's the Pope having his feet kissed by people. So it's again this imagery that even people who couldn't read could see that the difference between the real Christ and the Antichrist, the Pope. Here as well, for example, here's Christ getting very angry with the money changers in the temple. Here's the Pope tossing up the balance sheets of all the money, ka-ching, coming in from the indulgence sales. And here finally is Jesus carrying his cross and the Pope being carried by litter bearers. So all this was very effective in I think, spreading the message of Protestantism and the Pope, his people farting in the Pope's face. Again, you know, in keeping with Luther's scatological rudeness and so on. Cranach painted this altarpiece. It's in the church in Wittenberg. It's very important. I mean, this is the visualization. Luther preaching with Christ crucified, and then the congregation and the listeners over here. I think this is Luther at the Last Supper. So sort of working in the messages of the Reformation into, for example, the imagery of the Last Supper here, but we're not going to fit further, unfortunately, on this trip. There's the predella. Here we are in Weimar finally. So in the last couple of years of his life, Cranach's workshop moved to Weimar and into this building here, which is now known as Cranach House. Although I don't think it's actually a museum to Cranach, but we can see that that's where he worked in the final years of his life, and kind of handed over to his son, who was Cranach the younger. While he was there, they began working on this altarpiece called the Weimar altarpiece. But then Cranach the elder died, and his son completed it, didn't he, in the years.
Just pointing out here that from the stigmata on John's spirit, it hits Cranach. Yeah, it hits Cranach.
This is Cranach painted in by his son, and yeah, I think if we can look at it close up, so the blood splashes off his head.
So the spirit is so strong in religion that it's hitting in the face.
And then we see Martin Luther here at the foot of the cross. Here's Jesus resurrected, defeating the beast that is Satan. On the wings of the altarpiece, we've got the royal family, Johann Friedrich, his sponsor. There we go. So this is a self-portrait by Cranach of himself, and so we can see that this figure in the altarpiece is a portrait of Cranach. This detail from his story from Exodus. We haven't got time for that. The altarpiece is in this church, which is now known as the Herder Church, and it's in Weimar, and we will definitely go in it. Luther preached sermons in this church from the pulpit, and it's in this church also a triptych of pictures of Luther at different points in his life, Augustinian monk, and then sort of later by Cranach, we'll see that in the church when we visit it. Here's the church, the monument to Johann Gottfried Herder. I'll tell you more about Herder in a couple of weeks' time. He's very interesting, and he was the minister of this church at the time when Goethe was living in Weimar, so it's known as the Herder Church. Also Bach worked in this church. Some of Bach's cantatas were first performed in this church. Right, and then finally, in Weimar we will visit the Duchess Anna Amalia Library, which has this beautiful Rococo hall and library on the upper floors, but on the ground floor they renovated what they call the Renaissance Hall, and there should be, I hope still, an exhibition of Cranach that we will visit.
Just to say that if you want to see that Venus and Cupid, it's in the National Gallery, and it used to belong to Adolf Hitler, who pinched it so that it was ruined. So it's a lovely painting. We have it here.
I'd love to take questions, but unfortunately football starts in about 3 minutes. So we're just going to have to run, everybody. But thanks for coming.